Flosstube, it's Arlene here. It's Friday, December 18th. Trying to get a video in before I lose the afternoon light, because we all know it gets dark early these days, at least those of us here in the US, or in the Northern Hemisphere, I guess I should say. Yeah. I'll be glad when we get past next week, the solstice, and we ever so small, in small little bits, start creeping toward more sunlight. I think we all need it. And as I think everyone says, especially this year. I hope whatever holiday you celebrate, you are having a good holiday season, and you're finding the moments to find the positives, because there's got to be some. There's got to be ways to keep us going. I got a funny. So I have a skylight above me over there, and it's so interesting. Not interesting. It's science that during the summer, when the sun is higher in the sky, the sunlight crosses right over the table that I'm sitting at, and comes right here, to the point that if I'm up here during a summer morning, I get to the point where I can't work because my whole area is just too bright, because this is a white table and the sunlight bounces off it. As the year goes by, that path of the sunlight, which is this place, starts to creep backwards to the point in the winter, you can't see it, most of it is like over there. During the winter time, the path of the sun is across my books. I don't know if anyone else knows or is so consciously aware of how the sun falls in their home via a window, a door, something like that. But it's just one way that I am just aware of the seasons and the changes of astronomy, scientific world. And I don't know, again, trying to take those little moments to appreciate even the small things is well worth it. Anyway, thank you for being here. If this is your first time here, I so appreciate it. If you've come back, I've so appreciate it. I am aware there are so many Flosstubes that you could be watching right now, so I very much appreciate that you're here with me today. And I know that a lot of Flosstube is very much focused on cross stitch, and especially if you're new here, I do lots of things. I do cross stitch, but I also do other types of stitching, and that's particularly important for me to share today, because most of my stitching in the last few years has been cross stitch, and it's mostly my own designs. If you didn't know, I design under WorksByABC, link to my Etsy store down below. And most of the cross stitch I'm doing is models for my own pieces. Now, just a note, they're all pieces that I want to be stitching. I had an interesting conversation, Facebook group conversation, with some other designers about, do you design things that you yourself like to stitch, or are you designing something that you think might be a bestseller or is in, or whatever you want to say? And the vast majority, almost everyone, said, I'm designing something that I myself want to stitch, whether or not they're able to do it and use model stitchers and so on. And I think that's wonderful. That's how we see the variety of designs that come out, is we have a variety of designers, and everyone does what they love. So, where's I going? So I've been doing a lot of cross stitching as my stitching for the last few years, but every so often I've slipped in something else. If you follow me on Instagram, you know this. What I've slipped in the last few weeks is working on a Hardanger piece, which I'd like to show you right now. If you're not familiar with Hardanger, well, let's start here. So I am almost done with one major part, and then it'll be time to start another. So you could see I'm working on my scroll rods. I unrolled this for you guys. This is literally almost done, this stage of it. I just need to finish the border, that outer border piece. Stage 2 is when you do cutting, and then you wrap or weave through, depending on what you're doing, the threads that are left in between. Best thing to do is to show you. So this pattern, this is not something I've designed, is called Garden Highlights by Satin Stitches. She did this it's almost like an ecru or cream color fabric with white thread. So you see it a little differently than mine is. I'm using white fabric, white thread. But you could see that parts there, here, here, there's parts of the fabric that are going to be cut out, and then little bits of like weaving or wrapping. By the next Flosstube, I'll be able to show you what that looks like if you've never seen it before. So I've just loved working on this the last few weeks. This is a 25 count linen with Pearl 8 thread. Now, what's interesting about her Hardanger design, this one, and I've looked into it, at least a couple of others, is the instructions here have you do the wrapping using also Pearl 8. It is much more common to use two different weights of thread, to use, for example, Pearl 8 like I did here, but then the wrapping part using Pearl 12, a little bit narrower. So I have both. You know, after I cut and I need to start working on this part, I'm going to test it out and see which one I like. The picture, unfortunately, isn't quite close enough to really see whether the 8 in there is too chunky. But as with anything, you should just sort of experiment for yourself and decide, yep, I like that, or nope, I don't like that. So, again, almost done with, I can't hold this, it's always crooked. There you go. Almost done with this stage, looking forward to getting to the next stage. And as I said, it's just been a nice change, refreshing pause in my cross-stitching work. I actually, in the last week or two, I've actually started a morning stitch, which is not, like, that's my main stitching. I work on it just about every evening. It's very rare that an evening passes without me working on it. But I did incorporate a morning stitch, which is going to be one of my new designs. And I just thought, well, this is a way I can still be working on my design work and still have the enjoyment that the Hardanger is bringing me. Now, I've not done that much Hardanger in my life, but I wanted to share with you. I think what I'm going to show you, I've showed before way long ago, but it's worth it to talk about it now. So, how did I learn Hardanger? It's funny for me to say this now, but because so many things that I do and I enjoy, I've learned from books and, you know, recent years like YouTube tutorials, but most of my explorations into different worlds of stitching have involved reading books or articles or whatever. There was something about Hardanger charts that scared me. Like, I just couldn't understand. I mean, it just wasn't something I was interested in trying. This is a number of years ago. I can almost date it. It's either 2003 or 2004, because I got to take a class. This was at a craft school called Fletcher Farm, which is in Ludlow, Vermont. They obviously didn't have a summer season this past summer. It's one of those places that might just be on the brink of whether they're able to continue. In the years that I went there, I think I went about 5 or 6 times over the course of about 12 years. And what I was going for was bobbin lace. It was a place that had a week-long bobbin lace class, although Evelyn, who, she might be watching my videos. I'm trying to remember. If you're watching, hi. The teacher there, if you were brand new to bobbin lace, you know, she had her, you know, project 1, project, you know, to work your way through some beginning stages. But if you were experienced in bobbin lace, her approach was, what do you want to work on and how can I help you? So I got to explore different bobbin lace techniques with her over those years. How did I find Fletcher Farm? It was because, you know, some spring, late spring, I was looking for something to do, somewhere to go during the summer that would incorporate my interest in needlework. And through searching online, I stumbled on Fletcher Farm. There was a Hardanger class, but it was too early. It was like my school year. I'm a teacher. My school year I couldn't do it. It was like in the last week, and I would need to wrap up all kinds of things. But the week after that was a bobbin lace class. I had not done my bobbin lace for about 5 years, and it was that started me up again. Okay, I'm making a long story here, as I always do. So, but the following year, the way the classes were scheduled, I was able to take that Hardanger class. So I was there for the week for the bobbin lace, and then the weekend was a Hardanger class. And all it took was seeing someone do it, the cutting part, the stitching I got, but to see what the cutting was involved, and it's not that scary once you learn what you're doing. It's obviously the kind of thing where it's like check twice, cut once, check 3 times, cut once. But I also learned that if you make a cutting mistake, there are ways to, work around it. So I pulled out, I know there was some sort of little practice scrap kind of fabric, but then what I started to work on from this, and I admit I never finished it, and there's only a few things that I could say about that. I purchased this book from Evelyn. This is called, it's just called the Finished Sampler, because in this book is the Finished Sampler and the Unfinished Sampler. And you could see it's really long. And it includes a whole bunch of like specialty stitches and then Hardanger parts. And I wasn't interested in the specialty stitches part. I could do specialty stitches. I was interested in the Hardanger part. So I started it, and I had stitched in, I had stitched in all the base stitching, and you could see I started to do some of the cut work. Now this whole area is like a sampler of filling stitches. So if you look, each of those squares is filled a little differently, these main ones. So I never finished it. This is a crew with a crew thread. I know this was purl 8 and the inside is purl 12. It's one of those things that I think, well, maybe someday I'll come back to it. I don't know. I just know that I have it, and I'm glad that I have it. I'm glad for the introduction it gave me to Hardanger. It got me over that hump of being able to read the patterns and not be afraid of them. And Hardanger is a beautiful stitching. And it's always, for me, it's always fun to learn something new and then produce something that is beautiful. The only other major Hardanger piece I've done, this one I'm almost positive I've shown before. I have it attached to just a piece of linen here, and it sits like as a table topper. I don't even know if, I guess, which way was it oriented? This is the way it was oriented when I stitched it. And this was a number of years ago. Now what's interesting is how discolored it looks. It looks like that's white fabric with like a crew colored thread. And I know I didn't stitch it with a crew colored thread. I am almost positive this was white. I mean, it doesn't make sense that it would have colored so much. But now I'm questioning myself. Could I possibly, because it's so evenly that off-white color. Anyway, so this Hardanger, so here you could see close up. This is what I mean by wrapping the bars, though these are weaving them. And is there any examples of wrap? Anyway, where am I? And then also using a buttonhole stitch on the edge, so you cut off the extra, which I will be doing for my piece that I'm working on now. So basically, these 3 things are my Hardanger journey. I feel like there's some little like a little class project that I did some point, but the Hardanger piece wasn't the main part of it. It was something else. It'll come to me at some point. So the Hardanger has been my main project over the last few weeks. I know it's been a month or even more than a month since I last did a Flosstube. And some of that is I sometimes feel like, what do I have to share? If I work on one project and I show that and be done with it. But I had a little seed planted in my brain about a month ago. I was watching a Flosstube, Yvette Stanton, who, where am I? I have a bunch of her books, and they're somewhere in this neighborhood right here. She's an Australian designer. She does all different types of mostly white needlework, but she goes to like the country of origin and researches it, and it's fascinating that she will then bring it to a modern audience and create samples and create a book of it. So she has a Flosstube. It's called White Threads. I will link below the one that I'm talking about. They're very short. She's 5 to 10 minutes. I don't think I've ever seen one longer than 10 minutes or so. Last month she did one, and it was titled 5 Books That Changed My Life. So that title alone made me want to watch it. And that's what it was. 5 books. It came from a friend of hers who'd either written an article or posted something about 5 books that had changed his life. And she said he is a theologian, so his books are obviously going to be different than my books, but she shared her 5 books. And it was fascinating. So the first one was the Bible. The second one was a book that I have. There. It's the Reader's Digest Guide to the Complete Guide to Needlework. She was given that as a little girl. This copy was a used copy whenever. And how much she worked through it and loved the projects in there. Another book was her first Hardanger book, which I also own. You wouldn't be able to see it. It's one of the smaller books, like thinner books that are in there. And the piece she stitched from that. The fourth book was, if you're familiar with Nordic Needle, they were a very big brick and mortar store in South Dakota, North Dakota. Oh my God, one of the Dakotas. I believe they're still around on the internet. They're no longer a brick and mortar store, but they were the source for Hardanger stuff in the U.S. Great background story there. But Yvette Stanton had entered one of their yearly contests, and she had gotten her piece in their award-winning book. So that was one of her books. And then the 5th book was her own, the first book that she wrote, which is one of the Hardanger books. It's a Hardanger book that I have. Why does she have 2 Hardanger? Anyway, it was the first book she wrote, was the 5th book that influenced her life. So I was thinking about this, and I really struggle with this idea of 5 books that changed my life, because I can't come up with that. But are books a part of my life? Yes. Are needlework and crafting books very much a part of my life? Yes. So I had this idea, 5 books that have influenced my needlework. That's what I came up with, and I'd like to share them with you all today, if you're interested. I also have a secondary thing, but as I was thinking about this, is going to be too much to put in one video, but I already know what I'm going to do in my next video. Given that we are all stitchers, or not we all, but I'm assuming many of you who are watching are stitchers, 5 needlework pieces of my stitching journey, like physical pieces, patterns, and so on, that I'm going to look forward to sharing. They're all things that have been shared on my Flosstube before, most of them very early on. And just to be able to talk about your stitching journey through milestone pieces, I thought this would be an idea that others might be interested in. Finding 5, it could be 5 patterns that you're so glad that you have, 5 pieces that you've stitched. Just taking that moment to try and hone in on what are the most important parts, and thinking about why, of your stitching world. But I'm going to start with the books part today, and then next time I will do the projects part. And I think I have these in chronological order of my introduction to them, not necessarily in their printing order. So the first book is the Complete Encyclopedia of Needlework, the Therese de Dilmont version, book. There's a connection with DMC related to this. I think the Dilmont might be D of DMC. This was originally published. The original publication was in 1884. Obviously, plenty of reprintings. It is just filled with all kinds of techniques and stuff. Now, here's my honest thing. I've barely read this book. I mean, I've read certain parts when I've been interested in it. I haven't done any projects out of it. But it's the spirit of this book. So this was given to me by a fellow teacher, an art teacher at a school that I was at many years ago, when my first teaching job, and my creative world was starting to come out more and more. And she was very interested in the things that I was starting to do, the stitching, and that was also when I started bobbin lace. And when I was leaving that school, she gave me this book and said, "You need to know about this book." And so it opened my eyes to even more types of techniques that are out there. And it, of course, can be a great reference book. Now, I actually own 3 copies of it now. This is the original copy she gave me with her, Arlene. Thanks for all your help and friendship. May you always find time to be creative. Her inscription. I was given, you can't see it, another copy by a friend who found it at a thrift store and thought, Arlene should have this book. Of course, I didn't want to let them know that I already had a copy. And then a copy that I had found at a used book sale, which is an old, like from the 1920s or something like that, a small version, which is up on the shelf there. But this version is the one that I took with me as starting a journey, a new, especially because I was leaving the school and starting a new life in a new place. But this started my stitching journeys in a lot of ways. So the next book to share, as I was learning about all kinds of different needlework techniques, I found this. I'm pretty sure I bought this at Joann's. I used to, not so much anymore, love to look at all the books they had, and sometimes just stand in that aisle and kind of flip through them. I found this book, couldn't tell you exactly when, but I am going to call it my first stitches book. What am I saying? Book of stitches. In that, okay, I knew cross stitch. I knew some specific techniques, like I think I'd already done Hardanger then, or blackwork. But this idea that and this is only the first of many that I own, that there are books that show you different stitches, and then you can use these stitches in all kinds of ways. It's like, wow, huh. So although I have other books of stitches, most of them are there. I'm almost positive this is the first one that I got, and the one that kind of opened my eyes to this idea of bringing in other stitches to my world, learning about canvas work more, which I'd done a little bit of, but just learning the different things. So this has needlepoint, embroidery, and counted thread stitches. I would certainly argue that the vast majority of these could be used interchangeably, and that's a topic for another day. The next book to share with you, I had a store near me, sadly closed a number of years ago at this point, but many of the pieces that hang on my walls, they did framing. It was a framing and cross-stitch store. And, oh wait, this is dated. I could tell you this, 2003. They had brought in Doug Kreinick, like Mr. Kreinick, the guy. It was his parents that created the company. He's the one that runs it now. And I don't know if he still does this, but he would go around to stores and give a talk about threads. I mean, focusing on the specific threads that Kreinick creates, but thread history and so on. I think at that point, I knew about those spools of metallic thread. I don't think I'd stitched with any of them yet. I might take that back, but I barely knew anything about it. Going to this talk, I purchased this book, Metallic Thread Embroidery, which is put out by Kreinick, written by Doug's sister. I believe that's who she is. And again, it's not so much about the projects in this book. I haven't stitched a single project from this book, but this book reminds me of the time that I was introduced to a whole line of threads, and that the realization that there's so much variety of threads out there that I didn't know about. That, sure, maybe I had used number 4 number 4 braid, but there's 8, and then there's 12 and whatever. There's other things. They put out facets, and they put out ombres, and they put out all kinds of stuff. We got a little, part of what you paid for the class was a whole selection, a little sort of sample of all the Kreinick threads. And I still have that, with barely any of them have been used. I still have that collection of threads, just as like a reference. So I think of this book as the day, the time that my eyes were open to different types of threads. If the last book was about when my eyes were open to different types of stitches, this is about when my eyes were open to different types of threads. The year after this one, they brought in the store people, husband and wife, I'm not going to remember his name, but a guy from Rainbow Gallery. And it was a similar kind of thing. We got little samples of each of the threads, which there are a lot of what Rainbow Gallery produces. And he talked about the threads and a little bit the history of the company and all that. And it was so fascinating. And so those two talks, the Kreinik guy and the Rainbow Gallery guy, both of them men, which is interesting, just opened my eyes to the threads that are out there. And that's an important part of my stitching world now. The next book, it's needlework, but it's sort of, what I title this, influenced my needlework. 5 books that have influenced my needlework. This is a catalog of an exhibit that I went to up in Connecticut. Connecticut Needlework, Women, Art, and Family, 1740 to 1840. This was right after I became really aware of the world of samplers, like schoolgirl samplers, and learned an appreciation for them. Even though I may not be one that wants to stitch them, I've learned to appreciate them, to appreciate those who create reproductions, the designers who do that, the people who stitch them. It just, again, opened my world in a different way. So this exhibit had plenty of needlework, like stitching, like that one. But other things. I can't hold this very well. You can see some clothing articles, some quilts, some tapestry paintings. This is the one. Where am I? I remember visiting that exhibit, and yeah, this is all Faith Trumbull's pastoral. Okay, I was there just sitting looking at it on a bench, and some other people came around and were talking, and it turns out they were the wife, the husband. One of them was a descendant of the person who owned this and had, I don't know if it's donated completely or just loaned it for the exhibit. But, that was kind of cool to be there and hear them talk about it and how it had been in their family and so on. So the whole idea of a museum exhibit appreciating the work of our hands. And that's, because that work of our hands kind of covers it all. Whether it be a 8-year-old schoolgirl doing her first sampler or an established, wife and mother sewing quilts and things for their home. This exhibit really stood out in my mind. I've been able to see a few others, not as big as this one was. And on I pulled this book off the shelf and I thought, oh, there's bookmarks there. What are they bookmarked? Which is kind of fun to pick up a book that you haven't in a long time and realize there are pieces left behind of other times you've picked it up and why. So this first page, I absolutely was looking. This is Elizabeth Foote's bed rug. I actually created a pattern, one of my own designs related to this, and the story behind this. There was this page. I don't know exactly why I have this bookmarked other than it's a beautiful whole cloth quilt with amazing quilting on it. When was I ever looking at it? I don't know. This is a beautiful dress. I think there was a time I was studying the stitching at the bottom, but I'm not really sure. And I think the same thing here. I was just sort of admiring and looking at the designs. This is a bed cover, candle wicking. So it's like a treasure hunt in your own books. Ooh, wait, there's another one. What's this? Oh, that's the Faith Turnbull stitching. So that's the 4th book. The 5th book, I can tell you the basic origin, which is the first time I went to Winterthur's Needlework conference, Needlework conference, and the way those are set. Winterthur's in Delaware. I've been to their conferences, which usually happen every 2 or 3 years. I've gone 2 or 3 times this year. like everything else, it couldn't happen, but they made a virtual version of it, which I enjoyed participating in. The first time I went, they do like lectures in the morning and then like sessions in the afternoon. One of the sessions I went to was about resources in their library, in their special collections. And there's a huge table, and laid out on the table, with carefully those book holder things, were a whole bunch of resources that they were just sharing. This is what Winterthur has. And there was a comment, there was something said about the grammar of ornament. And I said, because it seemed like everyone else knew what it was, can someone explain what the grammar of ornament is? And I got introduced to this book. And what I was also told is, it is so easy to find in a library, go home and check your own library. And I did, and they were right. So I have used this book so many times. That copy that sits in the library, there was a point where I had it almost an entire year, because my library allows you to keep it 3 weeks and renew it 3 times. So that's 9 weeks. And then if you physically go in with it, and they could, basically see no one really wants it, they'll let you renew it again for another 9 weeks. And I did that for almost a year, my first year of doing design work, because I did a number of things based off what I found there. Then, okay, but hold on. Let me show you what I'm talking about. This is the full version, the Grammar of Ornament. Its original date is like 1870. Can I find it quickly? I should have looked this up. What is the original date? It's not, where is it? 1856. It is Owen Jones' study of decorative things coming from all sources, from ceilings, from tiles, from floors, from mosaics, from motifs found in all kinds of places. And it really covers a huge parts of the world. Now, is it completely all-inclusive? No, but there are a fair number of time periods and cultures that are covered. For a book published in 1856, it's kind of impressive that anyone even was aware of so much around the world. Obviously, you can get reprints of it these days. There was a version that came out a few years ago that was sort of laid out differently. Oh, I have one that a friend gave me that she found it at a used bookstore and said, Arlene might be interested in this. And it's all of this, but it's all like paged out in a different way. I like the way, this is the original, this is the layout of the original version, where there's, all those are in one page kind of thing. This copy I picked up at a used book sale. I saw it there and I was like, that needs to be with me. So I got it. And since then, I haven't had to get the one from the library anymore. Now, let me go back. So I'm there at the Winterthur Library. People are talking about the Grammar of Ornament. Someone explained to me, it's this book. You got to go check it out. It's 100-something years old. And there were other things that were being shown or being discussed. This whole idea of taking something that is printed, an image that is printed, and using that as inspiration for, in most cases, as the conversation was, textile related. And that got my eyes open to it. And so there have been a number of my designs that have been inspired by things that are in here. Just because it's a collection of really fascinating images, motifs, background information of where they come from. And it's been a resource, it's been one of the books that I've turned to a number of times when I'm looking for inspiration for something. I'm looking at something in medieval times. Oh, there's got to be some stuff in Owen Jones, in the Grammar of Ornament. So once that book came into my life, it's been used a number of times and in a number of ways. And so those are the 5 books that have influenced my needlework. Were there a few honorable mentions? Sure. I started to make a list. I think I ended up with 8, and then decided, no, I'm going to stick to this 5 things, this five books thing. Now, I was looking at the tag, 5 books, and there's a variety of things out there, mostly just book people. But I just thought it would be fun if we kind of brought this into our stitching world. And like I said, I also listed out, whittled it down, 5 needlework pieces of my stitching journey. This whole idea of take your full collection and find the ones that are the most significant, important, memorable to you. These are my answers to that when it comes to books in my needlework world. And I'll be looking forward to sharing my stitching part in my next, because I'm looking at the time. If I kept the stitching, this would have been way too long. So that's what I have to share for today. I appreciate those of you that are interested in my ramblings as I go down a slightly different path than a lot of the cross-stitching floss tubers out there. We all have something to give to this community, and you all who are watching are giving by watching yourself, so thank you. I hope everyone has a good holiday season. I hope everyone stays well, does their part in helping us get through this together. Until next time.